Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
Within 2 years of this statement, Russia invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and still holds it to this day. Unable to learn or even apparently recognize his predecessor's catastrophic error, Joe Biden, in one of his first moves as president, again laid out the red carpet for invasion to Mr. Putin.
Now, the U.S. is waiving sanctions on a company overseeing the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which carries gas from Russia to Germany. And a State Department report sent to Congress on Wednesday said the company and its CEO, Matthias Warning, are engaged in sanctionable activity. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken immediately waived the sanctions, saying it was in the U.S. national interest.
This time, it took only 8 months for Russian soldiers to march to war. Rule number 1 in avoiding war: don't invite the enemy to invade. In so horribly misjudging this dangerous adversary, both Obama and Biden showed their complete inability to recognize the reality of the world they were supposed to be leading. Their core philosophy is based on the idea that a strong United States is a bad thing for the world, and that dictators, like Mr. Putin, will not be aggressive if they're not provoked. In thinking this way, they completely misunderstand the very nature of the individual they are dealing with. Market advocates like me hate war. We think it's immoral, wasteful, and almost always unnecessary. We think that we should get involved in wars on very rare occasions under very specific circumstances. And when we do, you should use overwhelming force. I'll talk about the specifics of these conditions in a future episode. For today, I'm going to focus on one of the root causes of the war in Ukraine. And honestly, it is almost unbelievable to me. But we very likely would not be in a war in Ukraine right now, but for our nearly psychotic obsession with controlling the behavior of our fellow humans under the guise of concern about climate change. It's actually amazing that Obama even bothered to mention a military threat in that debate clip, because his administration was already saying that climate change was a much worse threat than terrorism. Joe Biden, in tacitly supporting Germany's decision to begin using Nord Stream 2, a natural gas pipeline between Russia and Germany, practically guaranteed that Russia, not sensing, but clearly seeing a display of weakness in the West, would invade Ukraine yet again. Many people don't realize that wars don't just happen. They result after a series of bad decisions made over years that finally result in shots being fired. First, you have to have the kindling, then arrange it in a way that it can catch fire, then add an accelerant, and finally, an ignition source. During the last decade or so, Germany has slowly and deliberately dismantled nearly all of its nuclear power plants, making itself highly dependent on Russia to provide the fuel its citizens need. Now, it accelerated this process after the nuclear accident at Fukushima, Japan, that killed no one. Actually, I take that back. There were some deaths that resulted from the reaction to the accident, not the accident itself. Sound familiar? In dismantling its own energy production capabilities, Germany has voluntarily put its energy independence in the palm of Vladimir Putin's hand and the head of the Ukrainians on Vladimir Putin's plate. Why did they do this? It's the same reason politicians do just about everything. They thought it would make them more popular. And specifically, they thought it would make them more popular with their leftist constituents who hate nuclear power. Now, unbelievably, nuclear power is probably the best and fastest and cheapest way to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, which, according to environmentalists, is causing climate change. Now, this contention is not supported by the numbers. For more information, see the attached link. Now, in addition to shuttering its nuclear facilities, Germany has obliterated its ability to produce power through the most abundant, cheapest, and an increasingly clean source around, coal. Now, in any complex and important endeavor, It's very important to keep your options open.
Remember what I told you about bullies? You like that, Westworld? That's the thing about smart guys. We always cover our ass.
If you box your entire population into a strategy that relies on the goodwill of one volatile dictator, bad things are going to happen. And Germany's not the only one. Italy, Greece, Finland, Hungary, they've all been drinking the Russian Kool-Aid for years now. And the ultimate result was inevitable. But it doesn't have to be this way. In Poland, they have learned their lessons, and they've learned them well. Now, the French get a lot of things wrong, but they got this one right. And in dealing with the planet's other dangerous dictatorship, the Australians have not allowed themselves to succumb to Chinese bullying. Now, I've not been a fan of Australia's draconian COVID policies, but on China, the Aussies have gotten it exactly right. Leftists, listen up. There is no risk-free strategy when dealing with an aggressor, but it makes no logical sense at all to put scientifically dubious claims about alleged changes to the climate that might happen sometime in the future above national security right now. In doing so, you're dodging an imaginary future bullet and instead stepping directly in front of the barrel of a real gun today. Now, the number of excuses you'll hear from environmentalists and their proxies in Brussels as to why the current crisis in Ukraine has absolutely nothing to do with them could fill an oil tanker. Don't believe any of them. When you put a scientifically flawed ideology literally above the immediate short-term safety and security of your citizens, you have lost the right to call yourself a leader. And you will find that your citizens will deprive you of that title sooner rather than later.